Hi, my name is David Knight, and welcome to those amazing Psalms. Psalm 63, the crown jewel of the Psalter. Psalm 63 is one of the most inspiring and intimate prayers in the whole book of Psalms. It begins, "O God, you are my God. How earnestly I search for you." It's a declaration of personal commitment and personal longing. The psalmist David knows God, but he wants more of God. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. That's intense desire, like a desperately thirsty man in the middle of a desert. The song is about the deepest longings of David's heart. It is such a model of spiritual hunger that in the 3rd and 4th centuries, the ancient church sang this psalm every Sunday. John Chrysostom, the great 4th century pastor, said, "The spirit and soul of the whole book of Psalms is contracted into this one psalm." And he urged the church of his day to sing it every day, reminding them of Jesus' invitation, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink." The psalm comes out of a deep crisis. David is under threat for his life, in flight from his pursuers. But the overwhelming focus of the prayer is David's hunger and thirst for God. And that's part of the amazing gift Psalms give us. They stir us to reflect on our own desires. We may believe that the highest principle in life is to love God with all our heart, but we so easily get distracted from this pursuit by the people around us and the pressures of work and life and our many anxieties and worries. The Psalms, and this psalm in particular, reminds us what is most important. David is urgent in his yearning for God, and he senses the gap between his aspiration and his reality. The longing in David's heart grows even more intense as he recalls times in his life when he has glimpsed the goodness of God, probably under the canopy of the night sky, which David calls God's sanctuary. Gazing at the stars and being overwhelmed by God's power and glory, like seeing the very face of God and being wrapped in God's generous love. Those experiences made David feel truly alive, and he longs for that feeling over and over again. "Because your love is better than life," David says, "my lips will praise you, and I will lift up my hands to bless you as long as I live." The rich experience of God's love is for David more precious than life itself, which doesn't mean that he doesn't cherish life, but as wonderful as life is, he has found in God something that energizes him even more. For 1,000 years, this psalm inspired generations of faithful Jews to sing God's praise. But it found its ultimate fulfillment in the life of Jesus, who was so energized by the love of his Father that he joyfully gave his life as an act of supreme love for God and for us. And because of him, a whole army of martyrs and saints down through the years have, with their dying breath, echoed the psalmist and Jesus, saying, "Your love, O God, is better than life itself." In verse 5, the hunger and thirst of David's soul is answered with images of feasting. "My soul is satisfied as with a rich feast," which echoes the line in the 23rd Psalm, "He prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies." And the inner satisfaction of that feasting is expressed outwardly in exuberant praise. "My lips brim praises like fountains of joy." The yearning of the opening lines has been satisfied. This is the reward that Jesus promised for those who seek after God when he said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." The next few verses of the psalm give us a glimpse into how David cultivated his intimacy with God. In verse 6, "I think about you when I lie awake at night." I don't know about you, but I find it really annoying when I want to sleep, but my mind is awake, wandering through worries, rehashing conversations I wish I could do over, working through tasks that are waiting for me in the morning. As king, David probably knew his share of insomnia and 3 a.m. worries, but he has found the secret of peace. David focused his mind on God, recalling times when God has helped him, reminding himself of God's character and God's promises. He says, "If I'm sleepless at midnight, I spend the time in grateful reflection, meditating on you in the watches of the night." Perhaps David's wives were sound sleepers, or perhaps they got used to hearing David strumming his harp or lute quietly as he sang his praise to God. But whether it was audible or silent, this practice turned David's anxiety into joyful praise. Unfortunately, I don't play the harp or lute, but some years ago I learned to do what David did. When I find myself awake at night, after the usual meanderings of my overactive imagination, I gather my wits and I say slowly 4 words: I belong to God. And I'll repeat them thoughtfully over and over. There's a richness in those 4 simple words that emerges as you quietly meditate on them. I don't know if that's how David did it or not, but let me encourage you to adopt that phrase or find some other text to help you meditate on God in those slow watches of the night. In verse 7, he says, "I sing for joy under the shadow of your wings." Despite the threats around him, David visualizes himself nested like a frail bird covered by God's strong protective wings. His spirit relaxes, and he sings like a bird. Then in verse 8, in marked contrast to the tranquil imagery of the bird's nest, he speaks with vigor and energy. "My soul clings to you. Your right hand upholds me." The motivation is intense, like a lover who won't let go. The old King James Version said, "My soul followeth hard after thee," like a pursuit. A.W. Tozer wrote a book called The Pursuit of God to describe the essence of our humanity as a lifestyle of pursuing God. And as anyone who pursues God seriously discovers, God is really the one who pursues us first. Clinging to God is a mark of David's intense desire for him, but the grip of God's right hand is stronger by far than David's grip on God. I mentioned Tozer's Pursuit of God. Let me mention 2 more titles in this vein. John Piper's Desiring God was one of the most formative books I read in my 40s. There are things I disagree with Piper about, but the core of all his preaching and writing is that the chief purpose of our lives is not just to know God, but to find our delight in Him and to enjoy Him forever. The other book is by a man I knew for 20 years who was a protege of Tozer. Keith Price was a ministry mentor and a preacher across Canada and beyond. Keith's book, Thirsting After God, is based on Psalm 63, which expressed his lifelong ambition to know God better and to seek Him earnestly every day of his life. In the last 3 verses of our psalm, David mentions his enemies who are bent on destroying him. But instead of vexing his soul with anger and stewing about revenge, David rejoices in God and rests his case with Him. David is confident that God, who is his deepest desire and his chief delight, will also be his strong defender. If you find yourself under siege these days, let this psalm inspire you to name God as the deepest yearning of your heart. Read the psalm over as a prayer. It will literally take less than 90 seconds, but it will help clear the air and restore your soul. Maybe take Chrysostom's advice and pray it every day for a week. You certainly will not regret it. Take care.